Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Imagine an aging Apache warrior appearing at an elderly rancher's doorstep, promising to lead him to the richest mine in the world. A mine where gold burst from the rocks themselves. This isn't a fanciful tale, but a story passed directly from those who experienced it. Today we journey into Arizona's Little Horn Mountains, where somewhere among the sun-scorched arroyos lies a fortune that has eluded treasure hunters for over a century. We follow the path of Poncho, the Tonto Apache, and the debt of gratitude that nearly revealed one of the Southwest's greatest hidden treasures. Around 1910, in the small settlement of Palomas along the lower Gila River, elderly rancher Jose Alvarado received an unexpected visitor. In his 70s and suffering from debilitating pain, Alvarado was surprised by the arrival of a Tonto Apache warrior named Poncho who had walked hundreds of miles from the San Carlos reservation. The Apache expressed dismay at finding his old friend in such poor condition, especially since he had journeyed specifically to reveal what he described as the world's richest mine. Alvarado noted the irony of such an offer when he could barely walk without pain. Their friendship stretched back decades. Jose Alvarado, son of a former California governor during Mexican rule, had settled in the Gila Valley in 1878 as the brutal chapter of Tonto Apache resistance was ending. General George Crook had forced most Tontos to surrender in 1873, relocating them to a reservation at Camp Verde. Despite their farming efforts at Camp Verde, government contractors eager to maintain lucrative supply agreements worked to prevent Apache self-sufficiency. The Tontos were forcibly marched to the malarial bottomlands at San Carlos. Of 1,500 who began that journey, only 1,400 arrived. The rest disappeared into the wilderness or joined bands still clinging to traditional ways. During one military roundup, soldiers brought captives to camp at Alvarado's ranch. This is where the rancher and Poncho first met. Jose Alvarado Jr. later recalled approximately 500 Indians camped on the mesa near their ranch. Contrary to their name meaning foolish in Spanish, the Tontos were generally gentle if treated with respect. His father often slaughtered older cattle to feed the displaced Apaches. Poncho eventually left the reservation and began wintering with his family at Alvarado's ranch. During one stay, a pivotal event cemented their bond. Poncho's young son fell desperately ill. When a traveling priest visited, Alvarado suggested baptizing the dying child. The Apache agreed, and remarkably, the boy recovered. From that moment, Poncho felt a profound debt of gratitude toward Alvarado. The Great Flood of 1891 saw the Gila overrun its valley. Hundreds of cattle drowned, and adobe homes melted away. The Alvarados lost their ranch and temporarily relocated to Yuma. When Jose returned, he established a new home near the growing freighting center of Palomas. It was here that Poncho found him decades later, determined to repay his debt. Despite Alvarado's condition, Poncho persisted with his offer. He assured the rancher they could ride directly to the mine. Alvarado conceded that, for something as significant as the world's richest mine, he could attempt the journey, but insisted on bringing companions. The following day, they set out northward. Poncho walked in the lead, having refused a horse. Behind rode Alvarado, while two Mexican acquaintances brought up the rear with pack burros. Their route took them west of the Palomas Mountains before branching north and eventually veering northeast through Engesser Pass in the Cofas. Tension quickly developed. Each evening, Alvarado's companions objected to preparing food for the Apache or eating with him. Each time, Alvarado insisted Poncho would eat when he ate. The arguments persisted until Poncho decided these men shouldn't discover his secret. He steered the group in a roundabout course to Alamo Spring. When the Mexicans protested again the next morning, Poncho privately told Alvarado he would kill them if they continued. Recognizing the seriousness of the threat, Alvarado announced they would return to Palomas, warning the others of Poncho's intentions. As they traveled back, Poncho asked to borrow Alvarado's rifle to hunt sheep. He directed Alvarado to head eastward to a large wash. About 50 yards below the crossing point, he would find a hole in the rock made by soldiers to catch water. Poncho explained that during their relocation, soldiers had stopped at this water hole. He instructed Alvarado to wait there. Alvarado handed over his rifle. The party continued until mid-afternoon when they reached a rock-bottomed wash in a broad valley. Just below the crossing, Alvarado found exactly what Poncho described, a cistern cut into the wash bed. He announced they would wait for Poncho there. They had barely begun unpacking when Alvarado spotted Poncho approaching. The Apache tossed a large rock onto the ground, instructing Alvarado to break it open. The rock had a rusty reddish-black surface. Alvarado took a prospecting pick, dismounted, and struck the rock. Jose Alvarado Jr., who later saw a piece of that rock, described it as extraordinarily rich with gold. The interior was so yellow that one could hardly see anything but gold inside. The elderly Alvarado excitedly showed the golden rock to his companions, whose attitudes toward Poncho changed immediately. They suddenly insisted on cooking him a good meal. The group camped beside the wash. Around 2 in the morning, Poncho woke Alvarado and led him away from the sleeping companions. He revealed that by going up the wash about 1.5 miles to a side wash, Alvarado would find abundant similar rocks. Poncho described it as more gold than a man could ever use, explaining it was the mine where he had once been held captive. The Apache promised to return in several weeks to help Alvarado work the mine. However, he never came back. Whether he died, was recaptured, or simply changed his mind remains unknown. In 1918, the elderly Alvarado, desperately ill in Yuma, summoned his son and related the entire story. He urgently instructed his son to follow Poncho's directions, expressing confidence he would find the gold. Within a month, the old man passed away. Jose Alvarado Jr. was running a successful dairy and wasn't inclined to abandon his prosperity for an uncertain golden ledge. When he finally ventured to the area years later, the old trails had disappeared. He couldn't locate the critical landmark, the rock cistern, among the countless similar washes in that vast country. The story attracted attention in the summer of 1955, when a small expedition set out for the northeastern Cofa country. Their plan was straightforward. From Alamo Spring, find a trail leading to Engesser Pass that crossed an arroyo containing a rock cistern. Finding Alamo Spring proved difficult. Maps showed it in different locations, and the official Yuma County map proved incorrect in multiple ways. After much searching and with local guidance, they found what appeared to be Upper Alamo Spring, developed with piped water flowing to a metal trough. From there, they followed deteriorated trails through a maze of buttes and canyons, searching each wash crossing for the cistern. As their gas dwindled from difficult terrain, they headed to the highway to refuel. The next morning, they discovered the home of Ray Hovater, whose father had been one of the first cattlemen at Welton. Ray himself had ranged through this territory for over 40 years. When told about Poncho's gold, Hovater mentioned knowing exactly such a hole in a wash. It was the only one he knew in that country and had appeared old when he first saw it 40 years earlier. However, it was in the Little Horn Mountains about 5 miles east, causing him to wonder why Alvarado's party would have traveled so far from the direct route. Significantly, Javier recalled seeing the elder Alvarado in that area, though he believed it was closer to 1910 than 1918. He noted that the hole was beside the old Indian trail from Alamo Spring. Adding credibility to the story, he mentioned that in the 1920s, prospectors had found rich gold ore in a butte alongside that wash, only a few hundred yards from the waterhole, reddish ore with gold visibly protruding. With Javier's directions, the searchers drove east of the Sheep Tank's mine into a broad valley. At a hill's base, they turned northwest into the wash on an old road. Though the cistern lay less than 10 feet from the crossing, they would have missed it without explicit directions. The cistern had been cut 18 feet deep into the wash bottom and measured 3 feet square. It was framed with wood and covered with a homemade screen with rocks placed atop for protection, an ingenious water-catching system perfectly designed for desert survival. There was no doubt this was the hole where Alvarado and Poncho had camped. In finding it, the searchers relearned a crucial lesson. Directions have meaning only in relation to the trails and routes that existed at the time. They had searched along the most direct route between Alamo Spring and Ingesser Pass, but Alvarado's party had made a wide U-shaped journey, placing the cistern miles from their expected location. From the cistern, Poncho's directions were straightforward. About 1.5 miles up the same wash was a side wash containing the golden rocks. Despite exploring likely washes, the searchers found nothing. However, given the summer heat and limited time, their search was far from exhaustive. The searchers departed without finding Poncho's gold, but they weren't discouraged. The directions and landscape aligned too perfectly for this to be imagination. Somewhere in those washes must lie what the Tonto Apache considered the richest mine in the world. Gazing northward from that strange man-made water tank in that desolate landscape, one recalls Alvarado's final confidence that his son would find the gold if he followed Poncho's directions. Perhaps someday, a fortunate explorer will rediscover Poncho's secret. Until then, it remains one more tantalizing mystery in the treasure-laden Southwest, a testament to friendships that crossed cultural divides and debts of gratitude that transcended time. In the harsh, unforgiving terrain south of Death Valley, a fortune in gold lies untouched, not because it's hidden, quite the opposite. Survivors who've seen it describe mountains of black nuggets literally sticking out of the ground. 1,500 tons of it, they say, just waiting to be claimed. So why hasn't anyone hauled it away? Because everyone who tries to take it dies. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we explore the most fascinating lost riches of the American Southwest. I'm your host, and today we're diving into one of the most deadly and mysterious treasure stories ever recorded, the black gold fumes of death. The year was 1859. A prospector known only as Smith traveled through the desolate landscapes of Southern California, south of Barstow. The terrain was strange. Thousands of small, cone-shaped formations stretching for miles across the barren desert. Smith was following more than just a hunch. For years, rumors had circulated among pioneer prospectors about rich gold deposits in this God-forsaken land, and Smith's professional interest was piqued. But Smith wasn't working entirely on second-hand information. He had a guide, a Native American companion described in historical records as a man of unusual character and intelligence. This wasn't just any informant. This was someone who knew about something extraordinary, black gold. This was peculiar in itself. Traditional Native Americans typically only recognized gold in its natural bright yellow form, commonly referring to it as the pretty yellow stone. But Smith's companion spoke of unusual black gold deposits scattered among the sterile, arid cone-shaped peaks. His information was deliberately vague, shrouded in the mystery of tribal taboos and ancient traditions that strictly forbade disclosure of sacred or secret locations. Despite persistent questioning, Smith could only extract imprecise directions from his reluctant guide, enough to tantalize, but insufficient for certainty. Was the Indian protecting the treasure, or was he trying to protect Smith? Smith wasn't the type to give up easily. He quietly departed with 2 Mexican mules, deliberately avoiding announcing his destination. Following the uncertain trail based on fragmented directional clues, he embarked on a gradual journey through the barren landscape. As Smith pressed on, both he and his mules began to experience troubling symptoms. Smith found himself having increasing difficulty breathing, while his mules exhibited distress through persistent coughing and sneezing. Something wasn't right about this place, but the prospector's determination drove him forward despite these warning signs. What Smith discovered next would haunt him for the rest of his life. As dark-colored rocks became increasingly dominant throughout the surrounding terrain, he came upon a macabre scene: bleached, white human bones, conspicuous against the dark landscape. Near these skeletal remains were small, deliberately placed piles of black stones, silent testimony to both discovery and doom in a single tableau. Smith examined these strange black stones. They were unusually heavy, immediately suggesting high-grade ore despite their atypical appearance. With their coal-black coloration, they seemed out of place in the natural environment. Smith's initial hypothesis was that they were worthless stones covered with a manganese film. But something told him to test them. Using an innovative method, he struck the stones against the metal horseshoes of his mules. What happened next confirmed his wildest hopes and his deepest fears. As the outer layer wore away, a dramatic color transformation revealed increasingly bright metal beneath. This was genuine gold, despite its unconventional appearance. Smith collected what he could and retreated from the area, his breathing becoming more labored with each passing minute. When he eventually had the stones professionally milled, they yielded the substantial sum of $19,000, an absolute fortune in 1859. But the question remained: how far had the deceased prospector whose bones Smith had found traveled with his fatal treasure? Upon Smith's return, his Native American informant was visibly irritated at the unauthorized expedition, but he wasn't surprised. "I know where those black stones came from," he told Smith, "and my father knew, and my grandfather, and his father before him." Despite financial incentives, the Indian absolutely refused to reveal the exact location. Instead, he gave Smith an explicit warning about death fumes and their inevitable consequences. These fumes, he explained, were fatal to both humans and animals without exception. The mule's symptoms, coughing, sneezing, deterioration of eyes and mouth, were just the beginning. According to the Indian, the area was completely devoid of life. No bird ever alights there. No lizard, no scorpion, no centipede. There was no vegetation, no grass, greasewood, or sage. Even scavengers like buzzards avoided the area, breaking natural patterns. The Indians' reluctance to elaborate further suggested either fear or profound respect for the deadly location. But Smith couldn't let it go. The idea became fixed in his mind despite the warnings. He recruited an unnamed friend to join the hazardous search and made persistent efforts spanning approximately 6 or 7 years. These unsuccessful explorations continued until Smith's death between 1865 and 1866. But the legend of the black gold outlived him. As the years passed, more details emerged about the mysterious black gold. Native Americans, described in historical documents as perverted from their tribal teachings by the white men, began sharing more detailed descriptions. The source was identified as a massive hollow hill, an extinct volcanic crater. Tragic accounts told of tribal members sent into the crater by white explorers. While they successfully reached the crater floor, they perished during their attempted return. Reports accumulated of numerous white explorers vanishing without a trace. In local spiritual interpretations, the poisonous fumes were viewed as the breath of the gods protecting their gold. The environment was described in increasingly macabre detail. The path to the crater was marked by bleached animal and human bones beside empty water containers. The location was precisely 35 miles from the nearest water source, through hostile terrain described as blackened, heat-ravished, earth-torn rock. The deadly atmospheric conditions featured heavy fumes rising continuously from the ground. Their physiological effects on living tissue were described as having a disintegrating effect upon the flesh of both man and beast. Medical comparisons were made to the then-modern understanding of radium poisoning, with experts concluding it caused a form of decay for which there is no remedy but death. The survival window was deemed impossible. There simply wasn't enough time to enter, collect, and exit before fatal exposure. But not everyone who saw the black gold died immediately. There is a remarkable case of 2 survivors who approached the challenge with exceptional preparation and strategy. After extended planning, they developed survival techniques and established an elaborate water-catching system in advance, emphasizing speed of extraction once inside the deadly zone. Their first-hand description of the deposit was astonishing. They described an almost limitless quantity of black gold ore in the form of nuggets and flat chunks with manganese-like black staining. The material was sticking out of the ground, requiring minimal mining. They estimated 1,500 tons were visibly accessible. However, their extraction was limited due to survival constraints. One survivor died shortly after the expedition. The second survived long enough to recover wealth valued at $65,000 worth of ore, a substantial fortune for the era. He invested in orange grove agriculture but suffered permanent health deterioration despite his survival. Analysis of the material revealed a complex composition including gold, platinum, beryllium, and a mysterious substance called bragdouchute. As the legend of the black gold spread, modern search attempts were inevitable. A treasure hunter named Wallin, who had extensively researched the phenomenon, believed the enormous untapped value justified significant risk. He suggested an aerial approach to overcome the ground-based dangers and provided detailed geographical guidance for potential searchers. The primary route, he said, was the highway from Parker, Arizona to Barstow, California, with an alternative path from Yuma, Arizona to Indio, California. The specific focus area was the region between Barstow and Indio, with particular attention to the Amboy area, southwest toward Virginia Dale. Whalen was confident in the findability. If you're thorough, you can't miss it. In 1936, 2 young men from Phoenix, Arizona, specifically traveled to gather intelligence about the black gold. They had aircraft capabilities with an expert pilot and met with the ailing Whalen for first-hand information. Following Whalen's directions, they executed an aerial search, flying in a circular pattern over the specified territory at minimum safe altitude for maximum visibility. But they encountered insurmountable challenges. From the air, they found it impossible to distinguish small cones from the surrounding desert floor. No visible crater formation matched the descriptions, and landscape features blended from the aerial perspective. They returned to Phoenix without success, concluding that additional information would be necessary. Curiously, Wayland was described as greatly relieved at their failure, suggesting possible protective motivation. Shortly after this failed expedition, Wayland passed away, taking with him the most complete information about the black gold's location. The black gold fumes of death remains one of the most tantalizing and terrifying treasure tales of the American West. It represents the ultimate challenge of balancing risk against extraordinary potential reward. The question looms: will technological advances eventually enable safe extraction of this deadly wealth? If you're ever driving that desolate stretch between Barstow and Indio, look out at those strange cone formations in the distance. Somewhere among them lies a fortune in black gold. But remember, some treasures are meant to remain undiscovered. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Deep in the rugged Santa Catalina Mountains north of Tucson lies one of the Southwest's most enduring mysteries. It is said that somewhere among these weathered peaks, concealed by treacherous terrain and guarded by the ghosts of its violent past, a legendary Spanish gold mine waits behind a massive iron door. The gold within was reportedly so plentiful that it could be chopped from the walls with simple hatchets. The tale of this fabulous treasure and the desperate men who sought it forms one of the most captivating chapters in American frontier lore. The legend begins in the mid-18th century when the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, controlled much of what is now southern Arizona, a region they called Pimeria Alta. The Jesuits were masterful colonizers who established missions throughout the territory, converting indigenous peoples and exploiting the land's resources. According to local tradition, these resourceful priests discovered an extraordinarily rich gold deposit in a remote canyon of the Santa Catalinas. The Jesuits established a small settlement near the mine, complete with a church whose bells, local lore insists, were cast from the mine's abundant gold. The settlement remained deliberately isolated, accessible only through narrow passages and hidden trails. This remoteness served dual purposes. It kept the mine's existence secret from the Spanish crown and other competing interests, while ensuring the indigenous workers had no means of escape. The operation thrived in secrecy until 1767, when King Charles III of Spain issued a royal decree expelling all Jesuits from Spanish territories. The expulsion came swiftly, the result of complex political machinations, economic jealousy, and suspicion of the Jesuits' growing influence. When the order reached the Americas, the priests had precious little time to prepare for their forced departure. The Jesuits in the Santa Catalinas faced a difficult decision. Their mine had yielded immense wealth, and they weren't about to surrender it to the Franciscans who would replace them or to the Spanish crown. According to the legend, they took extraordinary measures to safeguard their treasure. They sealed the mine entrance with a massive iron door, destroyed all maps leading to it, and methodically obliterated the trails that led to the site. Some versions of the story even suggest they killed the indigenous workers who knew the mine's location to ensure complete secrecy. The Jesuits departed with a fervent hope that someday they would return to reclaim their hidden wealth. That day never came. For decades after the Jesuits' expulsion, the Santa Catalinas remained largely unexplored by European settlers. This wasn't due to lack of interest in the legendary mine, but rather because of a far more immediate danger: Apache warriors. The Apache effectively controlled much of southern Arizona for nearly a century after the Jesuits left. They were so formidable that even in Tucson, which had a presidio, a military garrison, people dared not venture beyond the range of the fort's cannons. Historical accounts from the 1850s and 1860s, even after American occupation began, illustrate the severe threat. One particularly chilling incident describes an Apache warrior who pursued a Mexican man into Tucson itself, killing and scalping him in the plaza before escaping unharmed, his bloody trophy held high. Under these harrowing conditions, exploring remote mountain canyons in search of legendary mines wasn't merely difficult, it was tantamount to suicide. Yet the allure of gold has always drawn the brave and the desperate, regardless of danger. In 1843, Colonel Antonio Narbona, leading a military expedition against the Apache, camped near a canyon aptly named Cañada del Oro, Canyon of Gold. His soldiers panned the stream bed and discovered gold, seemingly confirming the regional legends of hidden wealth. 15 years later, in 1858, American miners briefly worked the same area but quickly abandoned their efforts after Apache attacks. Then, in 1870, a minor gold rush brought men from Tucson to the canyon, but this too ended abruptly when several miners fell victim to warrior raids. These discoveries in Cañada del Oro only reinforced the belief that the legendary Jesuit mine must be nearby, waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to seek it out. It wasn't until 1880 that the most compelling American version of the legend emerged, one that would cement the Iron Door mine in southwestern folklore. Solomon Alice, a United States deputy mineral surveyor working at a mining camp in the mountains, reported meeting two American prospectors who shared an extraordinary tale. They claimed not only to have found the mine, but to have returned with gold to prove it. According to Alice's account, the men had been working in Sonora, Mexico, when they stayed with an elderly Mexican couple near the town of Caborca. When conversation turned to mining prospects, their host asked if they'd heard of the mine with the iron door. The Americans admitted familiarity with the story, but confessed their skepticism. What happened next astonished them. The old man revealed he possessed his grandfather's diary, who had actually worked in the legendary mine. The diary, written on parchment in faded ink, contained hundreds of pages detailing life at the Spanish settlement and work in the mine. One entry described extracting 400 marcos of gold in a single day, approximately 200 pounds, worth about $38,000 at the time. But most valuable of all, the diary contained detailed directions to both the settlement and the mine. The old man refused to part with this precious family heirloom, but allowed the Americans to copy portions of it. Armed with these directions, and after one of them recovered from an illness, they journeyed to Cañada del Oro in January 1880 to begin their search. Their expedition reads like an adventure novel. Following the diary's directions, they hiked eastward up what they described as a middle canyon, so narrow that the walls nearly met overhead. They discovered a flight of nearly obliterated steps cut into a cliff face, which led to a cave entrance. Inside, they found Latin inscriptions left by the Jesuits, including the blessing Dominus Vobiscum carved into the rock. The cave passage eventually opened onto a cliff overlooking a hidden valley 200 feet below. Using ropes, they descended and found a stream teeming with trout and gold particles in its sandy bottom. Continuing eastward, they located ruins of the Spanish settlement, including a granite church similar to one they had seen in Sonora. After 3 more days of searching, they claimed to have found the mine itself. The iron door had rusted away, but its bars lay scattered on the ground near the entrance. Inside, they found a tunnel following a vein about 10 inches wide in what they described as a talc-like quartz gang. They even discovered ancient iron picks abandoned on the tunnel floor, the very tools used by the Spanish miners centuries before. When the Americans used these implements on the ore face, fragments of native gold tumbled to the ground with each strike. The prospectors told Alice they had placed location notices and were on their way to register their claims when they stopped at his camp. As proof of their discovery, they showed him approximately 100 pounds of gold nuggets in their packs. Alice and several partners immediately prepared to follow the men's directions to find this hidden valley and stake their own claims. But here, the story takes another mysterious turn. No record exists of what became of Alice's expedition, and the two prospectors who claimed to have found the mine. They vanish from historical records, their names unrecorded, their fates unknown. Adding to the mystery, in March of that same year, a Tucson physician named Dr. T.S. Hitchcock displayed exceptionally rich samples of gold, silver, and galena ore that he claimed came from the Iron Door mine. Yet he too seems to have left no record of the mine's location. Historians and anthropologists today offer a more skeptical perspective on the legend. They point out that the Iron Door mine story contains all the classic elements of a treasure tale: association with a powerful, somewhat mysterious group, the Jesuits, concealment in difficult terrain, a plausible explanation for why it hasn't been found, Apache attacks and deliberately destroyed trails, and perhaps most tellingly, the pattern that almost everyone who supposedly finds it either disappears or can't relocate it. While the Jesuits did establish numerous missions throughout the region, there's no documentary evidence they operated mines in the Santa Catalinas. The Jesuits kept extensive records, which are preserved in archives in Mexico, Spain, and Rome. If they had discovered a mine this phenomenally rich, it would likely appear somewhere in those meticulous records. So far, researchers have found nothing. Yet the legend persists, and not without reason. Gold has indeed been found in the Cañada del Oro and surrounding areas. Mysterious ruins do exist in the mountains north of Tucson, though their origins remain uncertain. The area contains the remnants of numerous early mining operations, some dating back to Spanish colonial times. For almost 150 years, treasure hunters have combed the Santa Catalinas searching for the mine. Some claim to have found ruins or cave systems matching descriptions in the legend. Others report strange occurrences, equipment failures near certain areas, unexplained disorientation, or the uncanny feeling of being watched by unseen observers. Modern research has identified several candidate locations for the legendary mine. One theory places it near an area called Pepper Sauce Canyon. Another suggests it might be connected to the Old Hat Mining District. Some believe it's actually in the Tortolita Mountains northwest of the Santa Catalinas. Whether or not the mine with the iron door actually exists, its legend has become an indelible part of southwestern cultural heritage. It has inspired novels, films, and countless expeditions into the mountains. The story continues to evolve, with each generation adding its own details and interpretations. The year is 1862. Henry LeBeau and his ranch hand are driving cattle through a narrow canyon in Nevada's Paradise Range when they hear it, an unearthly moaning emanating from a cedar grove nearby. The ranch hand, a local tribesman, doesn't say a word. He simply turns his horse and gallops away. LeBeau, despite his European skepticism, feels a chill run down his spine. Without hesitation, he follows. Neither man ever returns to that canyon again, and both refuse to speak of what they heard that day. What made these hardened frontier men flee in terror? Was it merely the wind whistling through rock formations? Or was it something more? Perhaps the spectral guardians of one of the American West's most tantalizing lost treasures. Hidden within the rugged landscape of Nevada's Paradise Range lies a secret that has tantalized treasure hunters for over a century. In the northwestern quadrant of Nye County, amidst the jagged terrain surrounding Paradise Peak, there supposedly exists a cave unlike any other in the region. What makes this cavern unique isn't just its rumored contents, but its bizarre acoustics. The internal architecture of the cave allegedly creates strange, haunting sounds when the wind passes through its complex tunnel system, sounds that many have described as moaning, wailing, or howling, giving rise to the cave's ominous nickname. But long before European settlers arrived with their dreams of gold, this cave held profound significance for the indigenous peoples of the region. It wasn't the promise of wealth that made the location special to them, but its spiritual importance. The cave featured prominently in local tribal cosmology. The eerie sounds, which science would attribute to wind passing through the natural geological formations, were believed to be the voices of ancestral spirits. The location was considered sacred ground, with access strictly limited by tribal custom, and knowledge of its existence carefully preserved through oral traditions passed down through generations. When European settlers first arrived in Nevada territory, they encountered indigenous populations who viewed gold very differently than they did. For many Native American tribes, gold held little intrinsic value in their economic systems. It was too soft for tools and weapons, and while it could be used for ornamentation, other more accessible materials often served just as well. But as these indigenous groups observed the newcomers' obsession with the yellow metal and the violence that frequently accompanied it, they began to develop a more complex relationship with gold. They witnessed how settlers would kill for it, how they would destroy mountains to extract it, and how possession of it seemed to drive men to madness. As conflicts between settlers and indigenous peoples intensified, a fascinating strategy emerged among some tribal groups. Rather than engaging in direct and likely futile military confrontation, they opted for a more subversive approach. They would take the settlers' precious gold and hide it. This brings us to one of the most intriguing chapters in the Howling Cave legend, the Downeyville Expedition ambush. In the early days of Nevada's mining boom, small settlements like Downeyville sprouted up wherever promising ore deposits were found. These primitive operations often lacked sophisticated refining capabilities, necessitating the transport of unprocessed gold, dust, nuggets, and flakes to larger facilities. According to local legend, sometime in the mid-1800s, a substantial gold shipment left Downeyville under armed escort. The security detail followed established transportation routes they believed to be safe. They were wrong. A group of indigenous warriors had gathered intelligence about the shipment schedule and had positioned themselves strategically along the transportation corridor. Their assault was swift and decisive. The armed escorts were overwhelmed and none survived to tell the tale. But this wasn't a random act of violence. It was a calculated operation with a specific purpose. After the confrontation, the warriors methodically collected the scattered gold materials. They didn't keep the gold for trading or personal wealth. Instead, they transported it collectively to their sacred cavern, the Howling Cave. There, in a ceremony that merged practical resistance with spiritual significance, they distributed the gold across the cave floor as a tribute to their deities. In this way, what began as a tactical response to European encroachment became imbued with spiritual meaning. The gold, so desperately desired by the settlers, would instead serve the indigenous gods, forever out of reach of those who killed for it. As decades passed and cultures mingled, some individuals found themselves straddling both worlds. Jimmy Graham was one such person, a resident of the small settlement of Berlin with indigenous heritage through his mother's line. Graham had grown up hearing his mother's stories about the sacred cave near Paradise Peak. She had told him of its extensive underground passages and confirmed what many suspected, that it contained a substantial cache of gold accumulated over years of resistance activities. But unlike his ancestors, Graham saw this not as sacred knowledge to be protected, but as an opportunity for personal enrichment. The cultural taboos that had kept the cave's location secret for generations meant little to him compared to the prospect of wealth. Graham identified an elderly woman from his mother's tribe who he believed possessed knowledge of the cave's exact location. His initial approaches were met with firm resistance. The location was sacred, not to be revealed to anyone, especially someone who clearly intended to violate its sanctity for profit. But Graham was persistent. Over months, he attempted to negotiate, offering essential European commodities as incentives. Eventually, he secured a compromise. The woman would help him retrieve some of the gold without actually revealing the cave's location. She would guide him close enough to obtain what he wanted, but the sacred site itself would remain protected. Nature, however, had other plans. The expedition began promisingly enough, with winter snow allowing Graham to track his guide's footprints. But as they ventured deeper into the Paradise Range, an unexpected warm spell brought rain, quickly transforming the snow into mud and completely eliminating their traceable path. The indigenous woman interpreted this sudden change in weather as divine intervention, the spirits protecting their sacred repository. Graham was left with nothing, and his guide, now even more convinced of the cave's spiritual protection, refused any further assistance or negotiation. Not all who sought the cave relied on negotiation. Another Berlin resident, known only as Ludwig in historical accounts, chose a far darker path. Ludwig had conducted his own independent investigation into the legend. He had explored portions of the Paradise Range and discovered ancient coins, which reinforced his belief in the substantial hidden wealth. Frustrated by his failure to locate the main repository, he decided more aggressive methods were needed. With an unnamed accomplice, Ludwig abducted an indigenous woman suspected of knowing the cave's location. Initial verbal interrogation yielded nothing. The woman remained steadfast in her silence. It was then that Ludwig made the horrific decision to employ torture. The woman was bound and suspended from a tree, a cruel method designed to induce both physical and psychological distress. Ludwig offered temporary relief as manipulation, promising her freedom in exchange for information. Despite the excruciating pain, the captive maintained her silence with extraordinary resilience. Even after a second application of the torturous suspension, she refused to betray her people's sacred trust. Eventually, Ludwig and his accomplice, perhaps shaken by the woman's incredible determination or fearing consequences should their actions be discovered, released her and abandoned their search. We now return to the encounter that opened our story, Henry LeBeau's brush with the unknown. LeBeau was no treasure hunter. He was a legitimate businessman, a pioneer ranching entrepreneur whose operations centered near the settlement of Ellsworth. His presence in the Paradise Range that fateful day was for entirely mundane reasons, routine cattle management with his indigenous employee. Their work had taken them deep into a canyon system near Paradise Peak when they encountered something that defied rational explanation. The moaning sounds that suddenly manifested seemed to originate from a specific cedar grove. LeBeau would later describe the sounds not as howling but as moaning, a distinction that experts suggest might relate to specific wind conditions affecting the cave's acoustic properties. The response from LeBeau's indigenous worker tells us much about the cave's reputation among local tribes. So what are we to make of the Howling Cave legend today? Is there really a fortune in gold hidden somewhere in the Paradise Range? Or is this simply frontier folklore embellished over generations? Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Happy trails! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.